everybody, and thank you for listening. I hope everybody's keeping happy and healthy. My name is Emma, and thank you, Nicole, Rob, and Sam from the STEM team for joining me for this chat on all things online learning and teaching. So for us and many other educators, we were unceremoniously thrown into this online teaching world, but we definitely learned a lot throughout this process. So I hope we can share some of the things we've learned along the way through this chat. And so for our first question, Nicole, do you want to talk about how our business model has changed in light of school closures and physical distancing?
Yeah, so it's been a really challenging time for us at STEM Minds. So typically our business revolves around delivering STEM programs to students in the K-12 market. And so that typically looks like running in-school lunchtime and after-school programs. A really big component of our business is running in-school workshops during the regular school day. And then we also run our own in-person programs and camps at our facilities in Aurora and Markham, Ontario. So obviously, on March 13th, it was determined that we would not be able to do that. And so we had to close our doors. And since then, our staff have been working from home and we've pivoted to an exclusively virtual environment. So over the last year, we've already been working on what we call the STEM Minds Online Academy. So that is the online version of all of our nearing 22 in-person programs. So that was something we were already in the process of developing, and we've taken all of that content and that structure that we've already built and translated that into our virtual STEM camp. So that is where students are able to join our teachers. Rob and Sam are two of them, for live classes done online through a variety of video conferencing software. This has been a really great opportunity for us to, number one, test out something we already wanted to explore, which was virtual workshops, so we could reach an audience beyond just where we're able to physically go. And it's also been a really great experience for us, and Rob and Sam will definitely talk more about that, for us to keep students engaged in high quality STEM learning experiences and also give kids the opportunity to connect with each other. I think what we've found is kids are really lonely at home and they're really missing their friends, and being able to join something like a virtual STEM camp is a great opportunity for them to be able to connect with kids who are like-minded, who are of a similar age, and just feel like they're still part of a community, even if we're all doing it from home. So over the last, we're entering our 9th week. We've been running virtual STEM camps for students across Canada and even in countries like Brazil, through hundreds of camps actually, and with more than almost 700 plus students so far.
Awesome. And then so I think Sam and Rob were going to speak to this, but before all of this, what were your feelings and prior experience with online teaching, and how have those feelings changed since all of this has happened?
Okay, so I actually feel like my feelings prior to this experience with online teaching was fairly comfortable, I guess. I had never actually done online teaching before, but I did my teaching program at what was then UOIT, which is now Ontario Tech University. So we had already sort of explored what a blended model of teaching or an online model of teaching would look like, I guess, and how do you integrate technology in a way that is comfortable for students, in a way that they can still be engaged, similar to how they would be in the classroom. I feel like those feelings have sort of changed, where I actually really enjoy online teaching. Obviously, I prefer the face-to-face because it's nice to be able to see the kids, to be able to actually interact with them, to sort of foster that environment where the kids can still socialize in an in-person environment. But it's been very, I would say, rewarding and very interesting, I guess, for my own sort of professional development, to take those concepts that we already do in an in-person classroom and then move them to an online or virtual environment.
Awesome. And what about you, Rob?
Yeah, so I had basically no experience with online teaching or anything similar to this going into this whole experience. I always thought it was an interesting way of doing teaching, and I thought that it was definitely something that was going to become very relevant in the future, just with how technology is evolving and how everything is shifting and kids are given access to technology at such an early age. It was the next step in teaching in my mind. as for how it's been going and how my feelings have changed, I think it's still definitely a huge resource, and I think it's definitely a very good tool to use, especially in times like these, being able to continue with students' education, continue with that social aspect of even just seeing another person's face that isn't your family or anyone directly near you is a huge benefit to these kids. And you can definitely tell that they're just looking for that connection in any place they can. So teaching these classes has been a lot of fun, being able to see a lot of kids returning and being excited to see you and talking to you about like what they've done over the weekend and stuff like that. So it's definitely an awesome thing, and I'm glad I've been a part of it so far.
That's great. Do you folks think online learning is for everyone?
Yep, go ahead.
I personally don't think that online learning is for everyone. There is definitely a personality or a mood you kind of need to be in to do online learning. And looking at a computer screen for an hour, hour and a half, however long the classes may be, can definitely be tiring, especially for younger students. So I think it isn't for everyone. I think everyone should at least give it a try to see if it is something that they feel comfortable with, but they shouldn't feel like disheartened or anything if it's not for them. It definitely is a bit tough for a lot of people who do really enjoy that in-person social interaction and are much more like outgoing in nature. Being stuck behind a webcam or behind a computer screen can be really tough for them.
Agreed.
Yeah, and I would say, just to add on to that, the one of the challenges that comes with online learning. So I guess my sort of belief or answer to that question is it can potentially be for everyone, but I think there's a lot of sort of structures that need to be in place on a sort of wider scale to allow that to happen. So one of the things that, one of the challenges that we see with online learning right now is the access to technology, access to reliable and stable internet. So, for someone like Rob and myself, who, we have access to technology, we have access to reliable internet. We live in areas where, they're not necessarily heavily populated, but like well populated. We sort of have the infrastructure available to us to be able to engage with online learning in a meaningful way. But there are a lot of students or a lot of people that don't have the same sort of, I guess I would call, privileges that we do. And that can make online learning really, really difficult. Same with students who have, multiple exceptionalities or maybe have extra support in their sort of day-to-day or normal school system. It can be very challenging for them because online learning is very, I would find, self-motivated. Like, as Rob said, you have to want to do it and you have to be, interested in it and engage with it. And for some students who, need extra supports, if they don't necessarily have those extra supports in place, then it can be really challenging and really difficult for them to engage. So I feel like I agree with Rob where it's something that everyone should give it a try, and it can be for everyone. But I think there's sort of work that needs to be done on a broader scale for it to actually be accessible and effective for everyone to do it.
Yeah, and to add on to that too, something that we've really seen with a lot of students as well is, for us, it's really been great because we're running sort of more STEM camps, which are intended to be, extremely engaging for students. But what we've even seen with some of our own students is students who normally have trouble with things like self-advocacy, so asking for help when they need it. That can be even more challenging in an online environment, because at least as a teacher, when you're in person with someone, sometimes you can just look at a student and know that they're stuck. Yeah. Whereas when it's in an online environment, it's very challenging to be able to kind of read what your students' reactions and what their engagement level is. So if a student is having trouble and they're the kind of student who is typically a bit more hesitant to ask for help, it's really easy for them to kind of just continue on in a state where they're not getting the level of support that they need, or they're not even recognizing that they need support. So that can be challenging as well. And to kind of bounce off of what Rob and Sam said as well, I think it's definitely one of those things that everyone should give it a try. And the nice thing about online learning is that there are a lot of different formats for it. So there's, more self-directed online learning, there's live classes like we're doing. So I think it can also take some exploration exploration to find the format that's right for you. I, for example, have done a lot of self-directed online learning, and I really thrive in that environment, whereas other people absolutely hate it. It's not for them because they don't have that social element to it. So I think it's also a matter of recognizing there's a lot of different approaches to it and a lot of different structures, and it's about trying out a few different ones to see which one might be the best fit for you, and also recognizing as a teacher and as a student that as much as we try and replicate the best parts of in-person teaching in an online environment, it's not a you know, one-to-one sort of transfer. It really is kind of apples and oranges in a way, where you really do have to recognize that it is a different environment and that you will have to adapt to it differently. It's not just going to be business as usual.
And so in this transition to completely online teaching, what were some of our kind of initial difficulties? And then how have we adapted to those difficulties? Because I know
Yes.
there are numerous.
Yes, so I'll definitely speak for Rob, Sam, and myself with this one. I know with our first ever class, we were extremely nervous because we'd never done it before. And like I was just saying, it's such a different environment. As much as we wanted to really take the best parts of in-person teaching and translate that into an online environment, there's only so much you can do in that regard. So just knowing it was such a new environment, and also I think especially as a teacher, recognizing that you just have a lot less control over certain elements of the experience because students are not there with you, that can be really challenging to work around. But what we've definitely found is one big difficulty is just tech issues. So for example, we're going to use a tool, and when, you know, we're there in person, it's really easy for us to figure out what the problem is and just fix it for students sometimes to get it going. So for example, if something's not loading, we'll typically know why, and we can just quickly come over and fix it. But when it's done in an online environment, and especially when it's done in a live class where there's, you know, we have some classes that are up to 25 students, we don't want to be taking up everyone else's time with just one student who's having tech issues. So that's been something that's been a big challenge. What we've really, I think, utilized very well is for all of our classes, we actually have two instructors. So we have one instructor who's leading the class and one who we call our chat support, who's there to answer questions in the chat. And also we utilize breakout rooms. So we are typically using Zoom for our live virtual classes. And what's really nice is that actually has what's called a breakout room option, where we can send the instructor and one student into another room so we can provide them with more targeted assistance. We usually get them to share their screen so we can figure out what's going on. But we found a lot of people have been very patient and understanding. They know that with STEM comes tech issues, and those are things that we obviously can't control. And I think as long as you're really demonstrating that you're trying your best to help people figure out what to do and you're trying to help them problem solve, people appreciate that, because I think everyone recognizes it's a new environment for everyone and it just takes some getting used to.
I would say nothing that we haven't really already touched on from an actual sort of, you know, teaching or facilitation perspective. I would say just, you know, as Nicole mentioned earlier, you know, one of the sort of biggest challenges that we have seen is finding the ways to make sure that no student is left behind. And, you know, that's largely why we do have two instructors per class, so one who's leading and then one who's in the chat support, so that if a student is either doesn't have a functioning webcam or is not comfortable going on webcam or anything like that, they can still sort of engage in the class through chat, through you know, unmuting their mic, through the webcam, like providing multiple ways for them to be able to interact and engage. And you know, at first, as Nicole said, it was a little nerve-wracking, and we were all very, you know, unsure of how it would go. But the more, I would say, you know, any advice to someone who is looking to get into online learning or online teaching, like the more you do it, the more it becomes natural, and you sort of find your rhythm and your groove with it. So
yeah. And I think too, to add on to that, and that kind of goes back to the tech issues as well, because the online learning environment is so different for students, and also because the kind of learning we're doing, like, it's not a passive presentation. It's not just our teachers and our instructors talking at students. It really is meant to be interactive and for students to be working through activities and projects. And with that comes the need to utilize your computer in a way that's a bit different than students are used to. So what we've spent a lot of time doing over the last several weeks is, as we see places where students struggle, and even when parents are struggling challenging as well, because a lot of parents aren't as tech savvy as is really necessary to just be able to themselves help their students. We've been putting together a lot of like cheat sheets and really quick video tutorials that we make available to people before they start the class, so they have time to review, how are you going to be able to both see the instructor and work on your project at the same time. That's something that a lot of people haven't had to do in the past, haven't had to use their computer in that way. So I think also creating those resources where you create them once and you can use them over and over and over again to support people, that's been a big help for us as well. And we found that over the weeks, we've gotten fewer and fewer questions because we're able to just provide people with resources that allow them to learn themselves and solve their own problems too.
Awesome. And so just kind of on that, as we're talking about how online learning is also new for our students as well as us as the instructors, what kind of skill gaps are we sort of seeing in our students as we're moving through these courses?
Yeah, so Sam and I mean, we can all definitely touch on that as well, but definitely one thing we've been really noticing as a team, and is something we continue to try and figure out, how can we create those resources to support students, is just a gap in computer knowledge, just basic computer knowledge. I think a lot of adults have this, quite frankly, in my opinion, a misperception that all students are computer whizzes because they know how to turn an iPad on and off and do certain things. And definitely there are a lot of students who understand how to do a select number of things on a computer or on any kind of tablet. But what we're finding more and more is that actual understanding of how to use a computer to support a kind of learning environment is a struggle for kids. So just basic understanding of, what do you do when something's not loading? How can you do kind of a split screen function? How can you have multiple windows open and be going through them easily to make that experience better? Mm-hmm. That's really a skill we're seeing is quite low in both students and parents as well, because it is something that I think is new for a lot of people. And one big one we're seeing as well, which for some of our courses isn't as big of a deal, but for some of them it is just low typing skills. So students who are just not very skilled with typing and who tend to move a lot slower, that can make certain activities a lot more challenging for them. So those are definitely some gaps we've noticed as well.
One that we've noticed over, as Nicole said earlier, the kind of 9 weeks that we've been teaching, and something that's been really amazing is we have had a lot of repeated students that have been enjoying the camps and enjoying the classrooms, that want to continue it on. But that does lead inherently to its own type of skill gaps. So because we are a STEM-based teaching resource, we teach a lot more of stuff like video game coding and 3D design and a lot more intricate stuff like that. So a student who's already gone through a week and is able to learn different parts of it, when they come back in the next week and we redo it, we have some students who have never taken a course, who have never tried coding before, and we have some students who have now done 5, 10, sometimes even 15 days worth of coding. So that skill gap is a bit tough, especially in an online experience, to try and help make sure that both students, whether they've done weeks of coding or if they're doing it for the first time, get that same experience of wanting to learn more and getting that new aspect to whatever they are trying to build. So that's definitely been a struggle with teaching, is trying to make sure that we tailor our lessons to accommodate both the students who are repeating and giving them new experiences and new challenges that they can build newer and more advanced skills on, as well as being able to teach some of the younger students. And like Nicole said, we've been using breakout rooms to try and facilitate that, separating them a bit more based on kind of their experience with coding, so that we can give more advanced projects and advanced types of things to those students who have been in coding, whether with us or other companies or other situations, or even just on their own, a bit more of that next step that they want to take.
Awesome. And so kind of on that note, how do you folks all feel that the student engagement has been during these classes as they're kind of overcoming these hurdles? How are we feeling like the student experience has been?
I feel like it's been great, actually. To be completely honest, it is, the student engagement is much better than I initially thought it would be when we first started going into online teaching and learning, just because you're never sure. Like, as you know, Nicole and Rob alluded to earlier, if you can't actually sort of see the students, if you're not in the room, sort of like reading their body language and stuff like that, it can be really, really difficult to know if they're engaged or not. But when you have students who are returning, week after week, you have students who are, thrilled to share their work at the end of the class. You have students who are, even if they're not on webcam or they're not comfortable coming on mic, they're engaging through the chat. It proves sort of that, the formula works and that these students are interested in continuing their learning. And as Nicole said earlier, I think a lot of it, especially right now during these times, a lot of that engagement comes from the fact that they get to socialize with other students. So they get to interact with other students, begin to interact with other people. They're feeling that social environment, even though it's through a screen, which is something that I think a lot of kids are craving right now. So I would say overall it's been great. Yeah, we're happy to see that it has been.
Awesome.
Yeah, and especially too, to bounce off of that, even from a parent perspective, we've gotten, and that's been really, I think, heartwarming for us as well, where it has been challenging for our whole team, where, our lives are working with kids, and so it's been hard to kind of be separated from that environment. But we've gotten a lot of emails from parents saying, their kids spent hours after the class continuing to work on their project, or their kid is like, wakes up in the morning and won't stop talking about how excited they are to log on to the class. And I think that's been really heartwarming and reassuring for us that, again, we're having that impact on students that we work so hard to have. And I also think that relates to kind of the multiple ways we allow students to engage with the learning content. So the nice thing about our virtual STEM camps is not only do students get the live classes where they're working with other kids and they're working with our instructors live, but because we also give them access to the STEM Minds Online Academy, where they have, tons more tutorial videos and projects and quizzes and discussion posts and even e-learning games, they have that opportunity to continue their learning themselves. Not every student is going to take advantage of it, because not every student necessarily wants to, but the high number of students we have had doing that, and the positive feedback we've gotten from parents that, kids are spending 3+ hours after the class because they're so invested in what they're doing, really shows that I think we have been successful.
And so I guess the next two questions are sort of a little bit more directed at any teachers watching or listening. But for anybody who's interested in leading some online learning or upping their online teaching game, would you say the platform you use matters?
Yes, I would definitely say so. Every platform has its positives and its negatives. And so as a teacher, you really have to think clearly about what do you want, and what is available to you, and what are the restrictions you're working within. So especially as a teacher with a school board, you do have to be mindful of what tools are approved and which are not. You especially have to be mindful of things like security and privacy concerns as well. But every platform is going to be different. Part of the reason we are using the platform that we are, which is Zoom, is because it does provide us with a lot more control over the environment. And I think it also really depends on what kind of teaching are you doing, where because our teaching is so interactive, we really do need to have a lot of features that allow for that interactive support while still maintaining the quality of experience for other students as well. Whereas if you're doing just more of something that's informal, a kind of a chat, or if you're doing something that's just a little bit more unidirectional, where it's mostly just a presentation, you don't really need that level of control, because that's not really what the environment requires. But definitely, I think things you should look for in an online learning environment are, number one, the ability to control, obviously, who is coming in and out of the classroom, especially when you're working with kids. You do really want to be sure that who is in the class is supposed to be there. I also think it's important as the instructor to have control over whether or not students can turn their microphones or cameras on or off, just to number one, make sure that you're not having interruptions in the class, but also number two, just to protect student privacy, as that goes back to the kind of idea that online learning is different. We do always remind students at the start of each class that, you know, when you have your microphone on, when you have your camera on, we can see and hear you, and we can see and hear things that are going on in the background as well. So it is just nice sometimes to have that control as a teacher when something weird or, you know, something that a student may not want. And I think also too, if you're using a tool that has a chat feature, which we have found very helpful because it allows students to ask questions in a multitude of ways. So students who are not comfortable coming on the microphone can ask them in the chat, or if our one instructor is busy helping one student, a student can ask a question in the chat and our other instructor can help them there. But I think definitely having the ability to control that chat in a more meaningful way is important. So some platforms give you the option where students can only send a message to the whole group. They can't send private messages, or you can even have some opportunities where the messaging is turned off altogether. It is important, I think, to think about what level of control do you need in order to support not only a positive learning environment, but also make sure that students are being safe and respectful online as well. And different platforms are going to give you different features, but you just really have to kind of think about what are you looking for, what is available to you, and what's the best fit for what you're trying to do.
I would say in terms of sort of like tips, I guess, for teachers who are looking to sort of branch into online learning, or who have been sort of thrown into online learning and are like, what do I do now? The same sort of pedagogical I guess the same sort of pedagogy applies that you would have in an in-person classroom to an online classroom as well. So one of the things that I have found to be very beneficial and very successful in online learning is that idea of a routine, and that idea of like the classroom routine. So for example, with our classes, we always open up the call or the room about 15 minutes before the initial class time. Rob and myself will usually have music playing in the background, so students know I can come, I can log in, I can, you know, make sure my mic is working, test to make sure my audio is working, and then we'll start at, you know, 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock or whatever time the class would start. We've also sort of worked a lot to develop routines in terms of checking for that understanding and checking for that engagement with the students as well while you're teaching. So especially when, again, some students don't have webcams or aren't on webcams, you know, it's really easy when you're like, okay, is everyone good to move on? And you can see the students sort of like nodding or give a thumbs up or whatever it might be, to have those routines even in the chat. So something that I always do, and I think Rob, you do the same thing, is, you know, I'm like, okay, like once we're ready to move on from this skill, just put a smiley face in the chat, just so I know that everyone, you know, is caught up or is up to speed with what I'm showing on the screen. The other thing I guess I would just sort of mention that is different from in-person teaching is I find you really have to go step by step and almost slow the pace of your lessons and slow the pace of your teaching a little bit too. It can be really easy, especially too for when you can't see the students. If you just keep going and going and going, it can be a lot easier for students to get lost. So we really try and make it a point to, you know, after basically every little step or every skill that we teach them, to really take that pause to make sure we're constantly giving the students an opportunity to ask questions or, you know, catch up if they need to, and sort of just go with the flow of your students, I guess.
And so in terms of like teacher tips as well, Nicole and Rob, do you have anything else to add as well?
Yeah, I definitely say, kind of bouncing off what Sam said as well, is you want to make sure you add in that time for interactivity, where it can be really easy, even in when you're in person teaching, that constant fear as a teacher of kind of silence, and you tend to rush through things, or you want to kind of make sure you're moving quickly so that you can get to, I think, what we sometimes think of as the real learning. For example, like when we're typically starting off a week of coding, we'll ask students, what is coding? And normally that kind of question would go very quickly in person, because kids would raise their hand and we'd say, okay, you. But then for students, and especially because it's the first class, we kind of have to walk them through, okay, you're going to type this in the chat. Here's how you do this. You have to give them time to type, which is often slower than if they were just talking. And so I think those kinds of things are important because it helps students feel more engaged with it. It keeps them from checking out because you're asking them to be actually participatory in the class. But it does just take longer. It can be easy for, I think, people to forget that, they're able to engage with you on a personal level. And so when you're able to, make funny jokes with students or just quickly take some time to chat with them about, okay, when we're doing video game design, what's your favorite video game? Oh, I love that one too. Oh, I haven't played that one. I've been meaning to. It just helps students, I think, feel a little bit more like there's a community instead of they're just watching someone talk at them. And I think it's really important to recognize for online learning, you want to make sure you're offering something that students can't get from watching a YouTube video, for example. A lot of the time, if you really wanted to, if you were really that invested, absolutely you could go and learn these things on your own. But I think the benefit of having a teacher with you is you have that sense of personal connection and you have that sense of support. So you want to make sure you're really thinking through, how do I provide that high quality and unique learning experience to students that they can't get elsewhere? And what are the elements that I'm able to provide that experience? So I definitely think those kinds of things really help a teacher keep their students engaged. And actually, I think what we've seen is really support positive student learning outcomes, which is what we all want.
I'll hop in for a second as well. So a huge thing that I found personally, and I'm sure Sam, Nicole, you guys have also found it, is some of the things you take for granted in person, like being able to show students where a key is on the keyboard for something that they're typing in, is something that you just can't do anymore. You're either stuck forcibly moving your webcam to be able to show a keyboard, or something that I found is like there are a lot of resources out there that even just pulling up a picture of a keyboard that you can reference while you're teaching and stuff like that seems so small and inconsequential, but really does help with that student engagement, that student ability to follow along and stuff like that. And like Nicole said, asking simple questions that, like, what your favorite video game is, or even just asking them like, oh, what are you having for dinner tonight and stuff like that, makes the kids really comfortable and excited to come back, because they're not feeling like they're stuck staring at a screen. They're feeling like they are part of that community. And like Sam said, we normally will play music at the beginning of our classes, kind of for those first 15 minutes. And in some weeks we will ask students like, okay, well, why don't you guys request the music we put on the playlist that we'll be playing, and as long as it's appropriate, then we'll throw it in there. And then you see those same students in class like 10 minutes early, and they're like, oh, this is my song, and they're so excited about it and stuff like that. So it's just doing all those little things that can seem so small and so simple really help with the students being excited and engaged in the activity.
Yeah, I think especially too, and I think that's kind of the common thread through all of these, is I think the more you prepare yourself for online teaching, the better off you'll be. I think especially as an in-person teacher, you really have to adapt on the fly, and that's a lot easier to do in person. When it's done virtually, absolutely you still have to be adaptable, absolutely you still have to roll with it happens, but there's a lot more kind of steps involved with it. So I think the more prepared you are, not to ever let preparedness stop you from diving into online teaching. Like we kind of said at the beginning, you really have to do it to get better at it. But I think the more you're able to kind of prepare yourself and think about, okay, how am I going to build that sense of community? Have I thought through what are some of the tech issues I might experience and how can I deal with them? Have I thought through how I want those classroom routines in an online environment to be set up? Not only are you going to be more comfortable going in because you'll feel more prepared, I think it'll also reflect in the kind of teaching you're able to do, because it'll be just a lot more intentional. And I think the more intentional you can be in an online environment, the more that students are able to respond well to it and are able to which is what I think we all want, regardless of whether it's online or in person, feel like they're part of a learning community and that they have a connection to not only you, but to their virtual classmates. And so I think that's something to really keep in mind as well, is just thinking through, what do you want for this experience and how are you going to achieve those goals?
And so as we kind of start to wrap up, what will this new world look like for us online? What does the future hold for our online presence?
This is something that we are going to be continuing, where, as Rob kind of mentioned earlier on in our call, this is something that I think education is going towards anyways. We don't ever want to lose those in-person learning experiences because we truly do believe in the power in them. And even what we've seen right now is that not every topic that we teach can really be done in a live virtual class. It can be done in an online setting, but having it as a live class for something with like film and photography, we haven't quite figured out what that would look like, or even if that makes sense for an online environment. So there's always going to be things that I think make more sense being done in person. But really what we're hoping to do over the coming weeks and even years is bring STEM learning experiences that are powerful, that are intentional, that are really well thought through and designed for students understanding where they are kind of in their own brain development, in their own lives, to an environment and an audience that is wider than where we can go in person. So the beautiful thing with this has been, we've had students from British Columbia all the way across Canada. We've had students from other countries. We recently ran a class for students who were in China. We've had students from Brazil join our virtual classes, and that's not something we would normally be able to manage as much as I would personally like to go to somewhere like Brazil. So I think knowing that this kind of learning environment can be powerful in its own unique way, and I think in many ways can bring elements that otherwise aren't actually available in an in-person environment. I think it can be easy to get kind of focused on what you're losing when you don't have in-person instead of what you're gaining when you're online, because I think there are things that are beneficial to students that aren't actually there in in-person learning environments, and also being able to reach a wider audience and bring these powerful learning experiences to students across the world. So that's something we're absolutely going to be continuing with, potentially offering a lot of our classes as an live online version as well. We're actually going to be continuing our virtual STEM camps throughout the summer. Right now, we're not given the time. It's currently the beginning of May. We don't know what the summer is going to look like in terms of our summer camps, which we typically run in person. So we'll be running a virtual STEM camp as well, to provide just people with options. And depending on where this goes, that might be our only option available. But I think the big one for us is being able to reach audiences that normally we wouldn't be able to reach. And so this is something we'll be continuing on with for a long time, because we've seen such a great deal of success with it. Despite how nervous we were at first, it was really quite easy to see very quickly how powerful it could be and the kind of impact it had on students. And that's something we don't want to give up even when this is all over, because we've really enjoyed it.
Something that I would add is I agree with everything Nicole said. I think that the online teaching model is definitely going to be something that we, not only us as a company, will continue using, but I think that even school systems and other types of companies will be continuing to use, just because it is successful. It gives people a lot more options, whether they're students or parents, of flexibility in like living and where they work and stuff like that. Being able to remote in, we already see is something that's going on in the business world, so it only makes sense to bring it to teaching as well. But some of the benefits that I think we haven't talked about as much, but that Nicole mentioned a little bit earlier on, is giving students the chance to learn about technology in a different way than just going onto a computer and watching a YouTube video or playing a game or anything like that. Giving them those resources that they don't even realize that they're learning. A lot of our students, when they first started with us, were not good at typing necessarily. They weren't very quickly, but as they've continued working, whether it's been through 3D design, which doesn't even use typing that much, they get practice with the keyboard layout. They get practice with being comfortable with using a mouse in one hand, a keyboard in the other, and stuff like that, that a lot of students just don't necessarily practice regularly, but is huge in the current state of the world. That is a very underrated skill that you need to go anywhere in like business or post education.
Yeah, just moving beyond that like consuming of the media and like giving them the skills to actually be like creators of the content that they otherwise would just be passively consuming.
Absolutely.
No, I think Nicole and Rob just touched it, and I think just to sort of add on and reiterate to what Rob just said, I think that one of the big benefits of online learning is that sort of those digital skills that the kids are building, and even just to sort of help them foster some of those skills in terms of digital citizenship. Of how to, effectively and appropriately interact with each other in an online environment. And a lot of this are skills, as Rob mentioned, that they're learning without even realizing that they're learning it. But these are the skills that are going to be life skills for them and are going to allow them to succeed as technology grows, as the world sort of advances as we've seen it advancing. These are really the things that are going to allow our students and our sort of future leaders to thrive in 20, 30, 40 beyond years, when we don't even know what that future is going to look like. But what the students are doing right now is they're building those foundations in not only the sort of technical or like STEM skills, but also just the computer and technology literacy skills that will allow them to go far. So
Amazing. Well, that wraps up our chat on all things STEM learning and teaching. So thanks everybody for joining me, and looking forward to our work in this new online space and whatever the future holds for us at STEM Mind.
Thank you for having us. We appreciate it.
thanks so much.